Right guys, got me engine block back, so I figured I better get the video camera out, else I'll be in trouble. There hasn't been much video footage recently, just purely because basically nothing's been going on other than work and pantomime and just crap like this bloody thing that's just driving me insane. But yeah, I got the block back now. Basically it's just the normal stuff really, completely rebuilt, cleaned out, new bearings, new seals, new rings, honed the bores out, decked the block. I've just put the old pump back on, now about to seal the sump on. Just thought I'd start the video before I put the sump on, not that there's much to see that's any different than normal, but the forge rod's out my old XUD, because obviously they survived the last engine, which is the first time an engine has actually come apart with 4 chrome rods still in it. Obviously standard crank, so DW10, HDI bottom end, standard pistons for the 16 valve, should I say, not the 8 valve pistons. Yeah, guess it's worth noting, whenever I'm rebuilding engines and anything that involves some form of silicon sealant or sort of jointing compound, that shit is the stuff I generally use. Well, I'll say I've used all sorts, but this seems to be pretty epic. The only other stuff that was good, which isn't even here anymore, was some stuff which the machine shop had left over and they gave me, but it doesn't seem to be sort of purchasable by the general public, so it's obviously from some trade place. That was pretty epic, but the Heimelar stuff generally seems to work quite well, and I've fixed all kinds of issues with this before, including main bearing leak issue. Another thing worth noting when you're rebuilding these is the main bearing cap down the flywheel end, which is basically this whole unit here. It actually slides in. You've got 2 rubber seals that go down either side of the bearing cap, which basically seals your crankcase, you know, this gap down here. Whenever you rebuild one of these, definitely get new seals. Don't even attempt to reuse the old ones, because I can guarantee it will leak. And also, if I was you, I would put plenty of jointing compound and stuff all the way around that as well. I've had trouble with them leaking in the past, and you sort of spend days, you'll change the crank seal and it'll still be leaking, and you'll change this, that and the other, and you can't work out what's going on, and it's turned out to be that before, which luckily you can do in the car without taking the gearbox off. You can actually pull that bearing cap right out from just literally removing the sump, but it is a farce to put back together again with these, keeping these bits in upside down, working in the pit, so it's a lot easier to get that right now. That's just one thing bearing in mind, really. Right, so I've just put a light coating of sealant on the bottom of the block there now. You don't need to put very much on, like I've seen people squeezing like half a ton on. All that happens when you do that is it all just squeezes inside, and then the next time you take the sump off you realise your mistake, because you'll find the oil pickup is just full of bits of sealant, and that's what happens when you put too much on. It's literally just a tiny coating is more than enough, because remember you're squeezing the thing on top, so it's literally just filling in imperfections at the end of the day. There's always a debatable subject about silicon stroke gaskets for the bottom ends. My rule of thumb, this isn't what is official, I don't know what the official answer to this is, but generally with alley sumps I say run sealant, and with steel sumps run the proper gasket. I don't know if I've got any gaskets here. That's an XUD set. I haven't even got any here, but basically it's basically used to go around the outside. You can get proper gaskets, but they work. I find they work better with the steel sumps, because for some reason the steel sumps, because they're crappy and thin, they tend to bend. So like you've got your 2 bolt holes, and you'll find it lifts in the middle, and you'll get a leak. Whereas if you use sealant, they don't tend to take, like after time they'll start leaking. Whereas a gasket seems to some reason to seal better. But with a flat face alley sump, it doesn't obviously distort at all. Obviously it'll break if it tried. So you'll be fine with just a little bit of sealant. I think the book says sealant, to be honest, from factory. Seat that down like that. And then you've got to start putting about 400 million bolts in. I generally tend to use air tools to take things apart, but I generally, as a rule of thumb, don't ever put shit back together with air tools, particularly not impact guns anyway. I guess if you catch everything by hand, you can get away with using air ratchets for screwing stuff in 90% of the way. But then even then I don't tend to. I'd just rather do it by hand. It's all very too easy to cross thread things, especially when you're fiddling around with heads and aluminium, etc. Okay, so I've just gone right around the sump there now and tightened them all up. As you can see, even with a little bit of OC I put on there, you see how much is squeezed out, because obviously this really is just a thou of interference space that has to be taken up, so you really don't want to put very much on at all. So that's all torqued down now. Okay, so we'll just go around the edge now and just wipe off the excess with my finger to make it look a bit tidier. Alright, so I've got the sump all on there now. I've also finished tightening in the bolts on the end bearing and seal carrier on the cam belt end. Get the paint ready to paint the block there now, just sort of cleaning off all the remains of the degreaser and stuff like that and letting it dry out. See the top of the deck there now, see it's all been machined down so it's flush again. To put that right, not much else to see really. I'm just going to go around now and put random bolts in all of the bolt holes to stop paint going in the threads, and tape over the likes of the oil pressure sender and the oil filter, dipstick, etc. Just so the paint goes where I want it to go really. Ideal. Okay, as you can see I've just screwed random bolts and stuff in all the bolt holes there now. Stuck an oil pressure sender in there, put that sensor etc in there, and some more random bolts in all the holes. Just stop the paint going in the holes and fucking up the threads and just generally making it gay. So it's pretty much ready to put some paint on me now. I'll probably just put some masking tape across the front and the back of the deck to try and stop getting paint, but you can always sand it off again. And just be careful you don't get it in the filter housing. You could almost bolt the filter water cooler thing on there just to prevent it, but I think I'll just be careful. I'm only painting it by hand, I can't be bothered to spray it. No one sees it anyway, so what's the point? Okay, I've got one coat of paint on there now. I'm not being too fussy because you can't see this really. Once it's put together there's so much shit normally in the way, so it really just stops it going rusty and looking worse. Also makes it easier to wipe off oil spills, otherwise it all soaks into the rust and looks terrible. While I'm waiting for that first coat to dry, because I'll have to give it 2 coats, dug out the head studs, so I'll start cleaning them up. Same ones out the XUD, ARP, extra strong high tensile head studs. Alright, got the second coat on there now, so just a case of pulling all the bolts and temporary sensors back out again now. So while I wait for that to dry, I've dug out the head studs, a set of ARP stronger head studs which I was using with my XUD, which I'm hoping to use with this motor as well, as the length should be the same. They're all covered in crap, so I'm going to clean them up, but you've basically got the stud, then the original ARP nut that I've had to make up for my XUD, these spaces, which basically, because they didn't actually make studs for the diesel, so they're basically petrol studs with adapters to make them the right length, and they're also the right width, so they centre up. That sits flush in the hole in the head, and the bolt is a flush fit inside, so it basically centres itself up and takes up the extra sort of centimetre of thread which isn't on the nut, and that's pretty much what there is to it. So I'll start cleaning these up. Right, just finished cleaning up all the head studs. Like I said before, they're a set of ARP studs, so obviously a lot stronger than standard. For anyone who doesn't realise what that's for, it's basically, obviously your head studs are what bolts your head down on top of the block. Obviously the more boosts you're running, obviously your cylinder pressures raise pretty exponentially, and obviously the bolts is all that's holding the head on the block. So when you get to a certain point, it's actually easier obviously for it to stretch the standard stretch bolts and leak around the head gasket than it is to actually push the piston down. As we found out, you do tend to find that with XUDs running lots of boost, so we run these instead. ARP actually sell they call it a torque assembly lube fastener assembly lubricant, which is basically to enable you to torque everything sort of quite accurately, because obviously if you've got everything greased with the same stuff they were using, and everything's clean, etc., then as long as your torque wrench is calibrated right, then everything's going to get torqued up exactly as they intended. Obviously if it's dry, then there's more resistance with the nut turning on the bolt, which obviously will torque out quicker than obviously if it was greased. But obviously if you're using a random grease, you might find it's a more whatever the word is, I don't know, I'm not a friggin' engineer, so obviously it will turn more and then actually over torque them. But I mean, the head bolts are one thing that torque settings are pretty critical for, or at least in the fact that you need to make sure they're all the same. It's not going to matter if you go over them all a bit, as long as you do them all the same and keep the force equal across the head. You don't really get any problems. I mean, over torquing them is a pretty standard issue, particularly when you're tuning them up, because obviously if they're standard stretch bolts, there's a bit of give before you actually get to the maximum point, which is more than what they actually use as standard. Right, so we'll drop the studs in the top end now, drop the head gasket on, and then it's time to drop the head on. And obviously it's important at this point to make sure that you've cleaned all the crap off the deck of your block. At this point, what I normally do as well, right before I put the head on, is I've got bits of paper in at the moment, obviously keeping the bores clean to try and stop crap, because you'll find if you get crap in the bores and it goes right down top of the piston, you can clean it all you like so it looks clean, but the trouble is it gets stuck down the side of the piston, you can't see it, and as soon as you start it, you just start scoring the crap out of the bores. So I always put something like that down there just to try and keep the dust out. But once you're ready to put the head on, I'm going to whip them out, whip around the outside, clean any dust off, and I normally squirt just a little bit of oil and just wipe it around the bores with my fingers, just so the first time you start it there's some oil there straight away, because it takes a minute or two for your oil pressure to come up and actually sort of keep everything lubricated. So just aids those first few seconds, same reason as assembly lube really on all the bearings. Another nice little thing about the DW block of the XUD is it actually runs 2 dowels for the head, which means you can actually sit the head on it, it stays in its position perfectly. The XUD only had the back left one, which is a right pain in the ass, because the head, especially when it's in the car with the XUD with its laid back style, tends to sort of slide off the back and make holding the head gasket in position right fast. It's also quite advantageous because actually my studs, obviously because they're actually slightly smaller diameter, the head doesn't actually centre up quite correctly, which is why I made the spacers so tightly machined before, because it also sort of centred it all up on itself. But obviously now you've got the 2 studs, the head will actually sit down exactly where it's meant to, without any fanning around. So that's quite a nice little extra of the DW block. Obviously when you put the studs in the block, you don't need to tighten them very tight, just bottom them out really and take them out half a turn, because obviously that's not what you're torquing up, you're torquing the nut on the stud, so you just want to sink the studs right into the head, and that's pretty much all for that. Don't go tightening them in silly or anything, because you won't really get the bloody things out again. Right, got all the studs in there now. It's quite important at this point, before you put the head on, to make sure you've got the engine in TDC, because obviously when you put the head on, to make sure that is 2. Otherwise when you start torquing down you'll start bending valves, which isn't very good. So I was just literally temporarily just put a flywheel on there. I mean, I could have just left it in TDC, but just to be on the safe side you can just stick a flywheel on, catch one bolt and stick your Allen key in, and you know then that it can't move off TDC. For anyone that doesn't know, pretty much all Peugeot engines, TU, XU, DW, you can lock the bottom end into TDC with an Allen key behind the starter into the flywheel. It's pretty common across a lot of Peugeots. So we've done that now, so we're going to make sure that surface is clean, oil the bores like I said, and then we'll drop the head gasket on. Okay, so I've just oiled the bores and locked it back off at TDC, so it's time to drop the head gasket on now, which is in the packet here. So I'll get that one out, and obviously the first thing I always do is make sure you've got the right gasket. Just because it says it is on the bit of paper doesn't always necessarily mean it is. So you want to lay it down on top of the block and make sure that every hole on the block has a hole in the gasket, and make sure that every hole in the gasket has a hole in the block, because you will be surprised how many times they put the wrong gasket in the correctly packaged box, because it's happened to me twice and I'm just one person. So definitely worth checking out. Right, so I'll drop the head gasket on like that. I've already checked all the holes line up. Make sure you keep your surfaces all clean. You don't want bits of dust and crud between your gasket and your block, or your gasket and the head for that matter. Okay, so I've just got the head bouncing on the top there. Wouldn't recommend that. Obviously the same applies for the bottom of the head surface. You want to make sure that's completely clean, dust free. Just get an airline out and blow out all the waterways, oil pipe, etc. Just to make sure it's all really clean basically. And then drop that one down on top. Like so. Right, so I'm going to torque the head down now. So I'll drop the head on, just pull the two camshafts out because being 16 valve, the head studs are obviously down in the head, and you can see them there. So basically going to put these spacers on, then the arc rings, grease on the nuts and on the threads of the shafts, and torque it down to, I think it's 104 newton meters, but I need to check that. Right, got all the nuts on there now. If I can actually see what I'm filming. Ready to torque them down basically. As before, it's important to torque these down equally, so it's what you have a torque wrench for. Absolutely critical for this job, really, if you want to do it properly. Relatively inexpensive. I've literally just got one from Halfords. I've had it for ages. It doesn't really get used that often, to be honest, other than torquing down heads and a few other jobs which I like to use it for. Generally, if you aren't already aware, whenever you get a head gasket and stuff, it'll actually show you the settings to torque it to. This is the bit of paper that came with the gasket. Now, and also the order to tighten them in. That's so that you equally sort of spread the load around the head. Now, as you see, as standard, they basically want you to go around the whole ring once at 15, then right round again at 60, and then the bottom indicates the degrees. But obviously that's with standard bolts. ARP actually provide their own torque specification, so I'll be ignoring that. But I will still follow the correct order. Although, I mean, it doesn't actually matter to be quite like that, but basically you centre out from centre, then outside. I'm actually going to torque these in a few stages rather than taking them all straight up to the full thing, just because I prefer to sort of gradually bring up the cross stress across the head. Right, we're taking them up to 50 newton meters. I'm going to take them up to 100 now. About 80 actually. Probably wondering why I'm doing this on the floor, even though I've got an engine stand. It's pretty much purely because I find it just as easy doing it down on a pallet on the floor, because once you've got the gearbox and stuff on, you've got to take it off the engine stand anyway. And with all the manifold and everything, it's just, I don't really see there's any much point putting it in a stand. Okay, I've just dropped the two cams in now. It's obviously important to make sure you've got the two cams in time with each other. I've put plenty of cam lube on all your main bearings in the head there. Now what I'll do is I'll dribble it on all the lobes, all across the top of the bearings, and probably just some in down around the rockers as well. Again, for the same reason really as the oil in the bores, just when you first start it, because it will take a few seconds for the oil to come up here, so it's kind of initial protection really. Okay, the top of the rocker cover side of the head is another machine surface with no gasket, so just applied some gasket material there again, just around the inlet ports and right around the outside to hold the oil in. Put the two camshafts in, not forgetting the chain idler at the bottom, little nylon idler thing. Obviously the camshaft oil seal, don't forget that, and then you can pretty much lay the top on and torque that down. Alright, got the top of the head back bolted down now. It's pretty much just a case of putting the tensioner now on the cross chain which joins the two camshafts together, and then the rocker cover can go back on, and that's the head basic part pretty much done. Alright, got the tensioner on there now. Okay, got the rocker cover on there now. The seals around the injector holes, so that's pretty much the head put together, other than the vac hump and some other little pieces on the sides really.